welcome to the 379th edition of the Business of Story. I'm your host, Park Howell, and today we have an expert who will help you humanize your high-tech offering through the stories you tell. But if you're going to humanize any of your leadership, sales, and marketing storytelling, well, you gotta start with understanding how to leverage the three forces of story. They include agreement, contradiction, and consequence. And the only way to do that is with the ABT Agile Narrative Framework, just like these folks have.
Hi, I'm Greg Head. In the last 30 years, I've been growing little software company startups into larger software companies as an entrepreneur and marketer. And these days, the biggest problem for little tech startups is getting enough attention in the world and then converting that attention into happy customers and growing revenues. It's a communication problem, which is why my world changed when Park Howell introduced to me the ABT three-step magical storytelling process that always works. It's the most powerful communication tool I've ever used.
Thank you so much for the course, the ABTs of Agile Communication. I absolutely loved it. It was actionable and short. I loved that I could apply it immediately and I didn't have to spend weeks and weeks in training.
ABT and this model of storytelling is built into us at a neurobiological level, and we share that with every human on the planet. You need to teach people to tell stories, but you don't need to teach people to listen to stories. They love them.
Start putting the ABT Agile Narrative Framework to work for you with our short online courses at businessofstory.com/ABT. I mean, come on. Aren't you tired of your messages getting drowned out in the cacophony of communication that we all get to compete in? You see, the ABT works because it spoon feeds our primal, pattern-seeking, cause-and-effect, decision-making, buying limbic brain with a setup, problem-resolution story dynamic that, well, it simply can't resist. So make your messages land right the first time, every time, by learning how to use the ABT for all of your communications at businessofstory.com/ABT. It's simply the fastest way to impact. One of the industries most ripe for the use of a proven story structure like the ABT is the high-tech world. Technologists, engineers, coders, you name it, they all get so excited about their technology, what they've created, that they forget that most people actually don't care about your product or service. Your story is not about what you make, but what you make happen in their lives. And that holds true for you and your offering too, whether you're in the tech business or not. But it's not enough just to tell a story. You need to know the algorithm, the source code, if you will, that makes your stories work.
I find that most people know what a story is until they sit down to tell one. Because story isn't just about the emotions and the things that happen. It's actually a very prescriptive, designed order in which information is revealed. And so you don't go to the solution first, you don't go to the problem first, you actually kind of do the setup first. And people want to go to the end of the story without actually kind of getting people along into the story in the first place.
Kari Nelson is the Marketing Director, Construction Division, MEP, which stands for Mechanical, Electrical, and Plumbing Engineering for Trimble, Inc. Founded in 1978, Trimble is a Sunnyvale, California-based software, hardware, and services technology company that supports global industries in building and construction, agriculture, geospatial, natural resources and utilities, governments, transportation, and others with their software solutions. Kari Nelson's background and expertise have focused on numerous digital transformation technologies, including servers, storage, networking, professional services, software, virtualization, and so much more. But now she's applying her storytelling craft to the construction management software business. Before joining Trimble, Kari was at Cherwell Software and spent over 15 years with Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Today, Kari shares her NICL, or NICQL narrative rubric that has worked well for her to humanize technology offerings to grow sales. It's based on what she learned about the Challenger sales model and from her experience, training more than 3,000 resellers for software solutions at Hewlett-Packard. Plus, you'll learn the impact Trimble is having using the ABT framework to simplify and clarify their tech story. All that and more for you right here with Kari Nelson on the Business of Story. Kari, welcome to the show.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
You know, you and I got acquainted, I guess, towards the end of last year, but I got the opportunity to come in and work with you and your team at Trimble earlier this year in March and had so much fun working through the story training. But what I loved most about it, and I often don't get when people are hiring me, is someone that has such interest and is so versed in storytelling as you are. So I thought it would be fun to have you on the show and just talk about how that all came about and how you've used storytelling, especially in the high-tech world throughout your career, to advance sales, meaning, logic, you name it.
Great. Excellent. Thank you for having me here. I'm super excited. My very first career goal was to be a poet. And so I started that career when I was about 5 and progressed through all sorts of different creative writing exercises throughout my teens and into college, and, have absolutely no ego anymore related to pen on paper through all the creative writing classes. And so that's kind of, my core of who I am, is to really, tell stories in the most metaphorically impactful way as I possibly can.
Where did you grow up?
Here, there, and everywhere is my standard answer. I was actually born in the Canal Zone in Panama because my dad was a Marine Corps officer. And because of his career path, I ended up moving 11 times by the time I was 11 and had been in 43 states by that point, until finally my mother was like, all right, enough is enough. They're going to have my siblings and I are going to have a standard high school experience of 4 years in one place. And so we ended up actually in Pennsylvania for that formative part of my life.
And how did you get into poetry or thinking that you wanted to become a poet?
Probably just in art class and writing and reading. I remember when I was 8, I ended up flipping over the handlebars of my bike and knocking out my 2 front teeth. And so I had to convalesce for the rest of the summer. So I ended up, it used to take me about 5 days to read one Nancy Drew Hardy Boys novel, until finally at the end of the summer I was able to read it in about a day and a half. And so through that, I think I just started writing and creating on my own.
So you knocked your teeth out and became an advanced storyteller because of it. That's kind of an interesting evolution there.
Yep.
Your poetry, can you remember a poem when you were a young lady that you can share with us?
I remember writing a poem about a monster and how it was trying to wake a girl up. It's about all I remember. It was on a crayon, and my mom ended up laminating it and putting it on top of the refrigerators.
So you studied at University of Michigan and then went on to, was it William and Mary?
Other way around.
Other way around.
Yep.
And you were studying English Lit first, and then went on to get your master's degree. What got you into technology, marketing, and sales?
Yeah, so as a young aspiring writer and poet, I naturally gravitated toward English literature and took all of the writing and linguistic classes I could find. And the logical career step was to go into publishing. And so I found a job as an assistant editor at a publishing company, and I lasted about 17 months is all there, because I realized it wasn't my writing or my ideas, but somebody else's writing and ideas and thoughts on one hand. And second, I realized that the publishing industry as a whole was pretty much tanking at that point, because most of the brands were taking over the writing and the whole publishing industry scenario. So therefore, I really decided to go into marketing, and a lot of marketing is about, connecting with audiences and stories and writing. And so I thought it was a really fun kind of fit to go that direction. So now people ask me, do I still write poetry? And I'm like, well, I write marketing copy and websites, so it's not too far apart, right?
When you got into marketing, were you surprised at like the dearth of storytelling and just story structure and that sort of thing, where, you know, most people are leading with facts and figures and data sheets and that sort of thing? And what'd you do about it?
Right. So great question. So at Hewlett-Packard, one of my roles that I had over the course of that 15-something years was executive comms. And so I remember doing executive keynotes that we would have at our big, huge hoopla company-wide trade shows. And one of the first executive comm speech I did under the direction of a vice president, we called it the Big Animal Slide deck. And the big animals were all the pictures of the servers, different shapes and sizes and speeds and feeds, and one particular quant or stat related to that server. It's X much faster than the last one. IOPS are 5% faster, and all these different things of like, big animal pictures, and it's all about us. And then a couple of years later, we got a new GM of HP servers, who's actually Antonio Neri, who's now the CEO of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. So I was doing his exec comms, and for his keynote, he said, it's all about the customers all the time. I want 4 or 5 customers on stage with me, and I want us to find a program for them to talk about their achievements and their stories in the context of what technology they purchased from us to enable them to do it. And we're sort of like, wow, that's a really different point of view. I like it. That makes a lot of sense. The customers are a hero. They actually had like, you know, the superheroes, and all the customers were the heroes of the story, and, you know, kind of demoted HP in terms of us being an enabler. We're the magic sword that's coming in to help them. And it wasn't about us. And his presentation and his keynote went off quite successfully. So that was really kind of the genesis, I suppose, of me getting into this point of view.
And I imagine that felt natural to you, coming from the English lit storytelling background. But did you get pushback from the people around you? Like, what in the heck why do we got to be telling a story? Shouldn't we just give them the data sheet?
Yes, of course. Because, I remember one particular situation that happened with the storage group in particular. And, you know, they were really thinking about how amazing their new storage technology was. And that was really what they wanted to talk about. But they were getting any traction with that particular product launch. People were like, you know, 5% higher IOPS. Well, so what? Who cares? Now what? You know, what problem is that solving for me? And they couldn't articulate the problem that it was solving. And so they really had to go back to the, you know, drawing board in terms of how to create traction for that particular launch. So I think through failure, they started to realize they needed to find a new way.
How do you make a story out of something like that seems so reasoned, so logic, so boring? Because that's a tricky thing, isn't it? I mean, to be able to take this technology and to humanize it, to get that audience member really involved in it. In your work, are there some tricks you've learned or some techniques that you feel that are really proven? If people just follow this, then they're going to get that connection they're looking for?
One powerful thing that I have done and that I did at HP was one of the things that I feel like we weren't doing well was really deeply, deeply understanding our customer, our audience, and who we were speaking with, and understanding the buying center, because we get deep down into the technology and how it's better than what we've done before, how it's better than the competitors. And so that part's always nailed in a tech company. But in terms of connecting with the customers, it's like, okay, what problems do they have in their day of the life? And it could be, you know, 100 different things that they're trying to do at any point in time. And there's just this small intersection of what problems they have that we can actually help them solve with our products and services. And so to kind of get those product marketing people into doing persona research, into doing market research on the industry in which their customers live and breathe, so that they start to have that sense of empathy and understanding and really specific details about what their business is like rather than what our business is like.
That's always a big paradigm shift for people, isn't it? That, and it's logical that you would go into a company and say, look, it's about us, it's about the brand, I know the product inside and out, and it's the curse of the expert a little bit. But the real heavy lifting comes when you go to try to understand and research what story is that customer living? What story are they telling themselves about your product or the competitor's product or the industry at large? And then truly understanding, empathizing with what they want and why they don't have it, so that you can show up and say, well, here's how we can help you get it. But it still has to be couched in a story before the big tech rollout, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't, or a lot of times different teams don't do that first step in the story setup, which is literally the once upon a time and every day what was going on. And that is the handshake, or I understand your world, or what is the broader context in which you are operating, and what specific focus may we be having here. And just, it's really like, hello, how are you? And that initial exchange to build rapport and to build trust with the particular audience. And if we just jump to a problem or we just jump to a solution, people are like, well, who are you? Why are you talking to me?
Yeah, there's no trust built. And if they don't feel like you actually care and have a solution that you believe is really going to work for them, then the rest of it just falls flat.
Yep.
In your work, too, you spent a lot of time at HP, over 11 years working there. And one of those, I was reading through your bio, when you talked about marketing and sales alignment. And to me, I've said this, a lot of my listeners that have listened to other shows will know that when I was a young man in the advertising world and I came into a brand and working with them, it always struck me. I was stunned that marketing and sales weren't aligned and they didn't talk the same. And to me, it's like having a left hand and a right hand. I mean, you got to have them working together. What were some of the biggest obstacles did you find early on in that marketing sales alignment, getting them aligned, and how do you feel like story plays a role in that?
Yeah, so some of the big obstacles in a company, especially as large as HP, is that the layers and essentially the silos organizationally that existed really inhibited even the conversations or even being in the same room or the same building or the same location as a seller, and to really deeply understand, what they were going through day by day. And so I think that inhibited a lot of kind of the collaboration that could potentially exist. And then second, as part of that, as marketing people, we never even deeply knew what the targets were for sales. So how many servers, at what revenue, at what profit were they expected to achieve? A product marketing manager or an events manager didn't have any knowledge of that, quite frankly. And so it's really hard to get aligned if you don't even have a base goal or common goal and understanding of what you're trying to achieve for the business.
And then how did you use story to be able to bring those two camps together?
Yeah, so one of the funnest things I ever did in my career at HP was a program that I named HPE Elevate. And we were chartered to train 3,000 resellers in 3 months or 6 months time in order to raise our revenue, and how to reach those sellers and how to persuade them to sell to an SMB audience, which included not only servers where I worked, but also storage and networking and services and software as kind of a package, and not have an individual rep come up. And for resellers, they didn't even behave that way anyway. So I actually contracted with an outside agency, brought them in, and that was the first time I ever learned about the Challenger sale from CEB. And the Challenger sale is essentially a story that really takes a seller helps the seller connect with the audience and understand their world, gives them a commercial insight in their parlance, takes them down through the valley of death, saying why their status quo is so unbearable, and then reveals a generic solution a new way and says, oh, wow, look, by the way, our products actually meet all those attributes, sign here. And so I was able to teach the sellers 4 different kind of transformation areas we were targeting at HP at the time, and created a story for each one of those and taught them how to sell this portfolio in the context of one of those 4 stories, depending on where their customer might be oriented to. So that was really kind of my first foray into, okay, I'm chief storyteller at HP now.
And was it that Challenger sale that you recognized in it, the story structure that kind of was innate to you, and you're like, hey, wait a minute, this is all based on story structure. Is there a particular structure you like, a go-to that you use when you were literally writing, an anecdotal message or a short story for that big business impact you're trying to make?
Right. One of the like a little rubric I learned early in my career was called NICL, and it stands for NICQL. And it's a way to kind of get people aligned, which is a need, and it's important because, so the consequences of doing or not doing this would be X, Y, or Z, and then if you can quantify them, which is the Q, even better. So look, listen, L, which is, okay, here's a solution. What do you think? Pile onto my solution, or take me into a different direction, or basically trying to triangulate first on the problem to be solved and why it's important to solve that problem. And then the solution can pretty much, people get, energy towards solving it then. And that's a really, that's essentially a story as well, which is, kind of once upon a time we needed this and it was really important, but we don't have it because of all these, things, and it's awful because of these consequences. So what are we going to do about it? And I found it a really simple and compelling way to engage people in problem solving rather than, figuring out, was their fault or somebody else's fault or because of this or that. It's like, no, let's focus here.
So that's NICL, NICQU or NICQL, need,
correct,
impact, the consequence of that, quantify it so you can demonstrate with numbers, what the impact is going to have, and then look and listen. And that look and listen is the answer, is your call to action, is here's what we're going to do next about it.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's the therefore. It's, this is the solution. And the idea here isn't to go down kind of like a thesis and say this is the best solution because of A, B, and C. It's actually the preamble to all of that, which is to say, do we agree in the beginning, do we even have a problem that needs to be solved? Do you agree we have a problem to be solved? Do we agree it's important? And then here's an idea of how we could solve it. And then it opens up people to engage and pile on and converse and think about solving the problem that has been agreed upon. And it just focuses energy and attention in a really impactful way.
When you started incorporating some of these story structures at HP and some of your other work, did you get pushback from your colleagues?
Yes, of course I did. One, it's really, really hard. And two, people are used to operating structures that exist and they have to produce what they're already producing pretty much. It's like, at the end of the day, we have to have a data sheet. We have to have a product website. We have to have a product presentation. There is no doubt that those are, required information vehicles that we are driving people to. And a lot of people are so focused and not overworked, but that's a full-time job. And to also add story on top of it is yet another thing to do, and to really figure out the reason for doing it and why it's going to make a difference is really, really challenging until people actually see a successful application of the story and they're like, oh, wait, how did that happen? What was the magic there? So it does take a lot of work. There's no doubt about it.
It's so interesting to me. I just spent 10 days vacation up in the Seattle area and was over at a lake house in Eastern Washington with a whole bunch of buddies of mine, guys from high school, and some of the guys I haven't seen from college for a long time. So what do? Sit around a lake, you drink beer, you play golf, and you BS. And I was kind of the fly on the wall catching up with a lot of these folks. And they were talking about their businesses and the people they worked with and different things that went on. And it just struck me once again how natural that storytelling is. And it builds trust with the person sitting across from you. They take you on an adventure. Quite often something is blown up to make it interesting, and then they come in and say, and here's how we fixed it. So we do it so naturally when we're not in the office. Why do you think it's so much harder when we sit down behind our desk and want to craft a message about something we're selling?
Yeah, 2 points and 2 really quotes that I want to add to that. The first one is from Flannery O'Connor, who said, "I find that most people know what a story is until they sit down to tell one. Because story isn't just about the emotions and the things that happen. It's actually a very prescriptive, designed order in which information is revealed." Right? And so you don't go to the solution first. You don't go to the problem first. You actually kind of do the setup first. And people want to go to the end of the story without actually kind of getting people along into the story in the first place. The second key point, and I think this came from Wired for Story with Lisa Cron, or she quoted it, which is, a story is like life with all the boring parts left out. And so I think Maya Angelou recently wrote a book to make the novel as short as she possibly could, about this guy who was taking a bus drive back to his home in Georgia somewhere to take care of his sister. And I thought that was really, really great, because I think a lot of people struggle in writing stories because they think they have to have everything in there. It's like, oh, and this detail and that detail and da-da-da. And they're not singularly focused on the point that they're trying to make.
And how do you find that focus?
I think it gets grounded in the customer and the problem, and what is the most important problem, the most urgent problem that they have that particular company or brand is uniquely positioned to solve. And so, again, kind of going back to any individual or any company or any business has a cacophony of problems, all sorts of problems. And it's just this very sliver overlap between, what a company can do well that has a product to be offered versus, what a company they're trying to sell to, what are all the problems that they have. And this, I think, is why it's so critical to, spend the time and the energy doing the research and talking with customers and reading articles and going to where they live and understanding their world, because without that, we're just going to be, oh, that message didn't stick, or that message didn't stick, or, well, that one seemed to work better, but I don't know why. You get to fall into that trap otherwise.
I know you are a big believer in personas, customer personas, and really understanding the character in your story, right? Because the story's not about you, it's not about the brand, it's not about your product or service, it's about that customer.
Yep.
It's hard, though, isn't it, in these, organizations of all sizes, when they're saying, well, that's all well and good, but we don't have the time for that, Kari. We've got to be selling now. We don't have the resources to invest in that. How do you go about your customer persona development so that you have faith in them when you get the feedback back?
That we don't have time to do personas is like, well, do you have time to lose money? I mean, that's kind of it at the bottom of the end of the day, is that if you don't have time to understand your customers, then why are you trying to serve this particular customer base? I would suggest it's like, the technology, you've got the technologist to tell you all of that. It's not, you have that core capability, and what most companies don't have is the deep connection and understanding to customers. And so it would actually be a massive competitive differentiation to have that understanding and have that connection. I remember when I started a storytelling kind of workshop at HP, and I was like, oh, here's the structure, and we want to have our websites to follow a storyline. And I thought I was, ahead of the curve. And then I saw that Nutanix had done a landing page exactly that way. And I was just like, oh boy, And they're like, and the storage people were all up in arms about Nutanix because they were eating their lunch. And I'm like, see what they're doing? This is why. And they're like, oh, I get it now. And so then they started to engage and embrace with storytelling once they saw what competitors were doing and getting an advantage over them as a result.
Yeah. It's fun when you can demonstrate the magic in action, because it does feel like magic when it's done well. I mean, working with you all, we worked on your LinkedIn post, and in March of this year, across 5 different countries, you were averaging about a 4% engagement rate, which was really good. If you look at LinkedIn, says if you get 2% engagement rate, you're doing pretty good. But in some cases, I think it was France, we got it up to 17%. By just simply following a very, very basic story structure of the ABT. Now, is this the first time you have worked with the ABT? When it came in and taught you and your team this, or had you seen it before?
Yes, it's the very first time I saw the ABT. I was like, that makes sense. It makes it really easy for people to remember, and that's what I most liked about it, because, the CEB had, I ultimately revised it and changed it a little bit, but it ultimately had 7 steps to a story. But I liked the ABT because it really consolidated those steps into just 3. And it's like the setup, here's the problem, here's the solution, and then, people can go from there and make their story better by bringing in a villain or bringing in, hey, I'm the Obi-Wan Kenobi with the magic wand that's going to help you through this, which is essentially the vendor. So I thought it was a really, really good way to help people remember the structure and apply the structure.
Yeah, as you know, I teach the 10-step story cycle system. There's the up to 17 steps of the monomyth. There's the 7 or 8 steps of the Pixar way. And I really like the Pixar way too. But even that, I have found, is a little bit onerous for people because they're business people. They're sales and marketing people. They're not screenwriters. They don't have their lit degree, right? And they're not even interested in that. They want to connect better. And so I've found the ABT with the 3 steps is so easy. And yet, the problem is it looks so simple that you should be able to do it right out of the chute, right? But it just takes work to get there.
Yep. And I would pause it again, because right now we are creating a new construction sector website with, 25 or so pages, and each page at the top has its hero banner with its complimentary little short text that we all want to make as an ABT. And so I looked at that, and some of them, the writer initially did it. It's like, yes, score, you got an A on that point. And some of the others were like, what are you even talking about here? I don't understand. And so, we've actually been going back and purposefully trying to make every single one of those, 3 or 4 line parts that complement the hero banner at the top of every page, a little ABT, because that is prime real estate. That's the first thing people will see. Are we engaging with them to have a conversation so that they'll actually wonder, okay, what's next? What else is on this page that's for me?
Well, and we found if you build enough contradiction or contrast between that statement of agreement, as you mentioned earlier, this is what a brighter tomorrow looks like for you and why you want it, but you don't have it because of this, then they'll give you all day with your therefore. They'll say, you're exactly right. You understand me. You get me. You know what my problem is. And so what's your solution? Now, your solution may take a heck of a lot longer to describe, but you now have their attention. And even as you're going through those solutions and you're solving different problems as you go, you use a little ABT to set up each one of those problems so that they can couch it easily in their head, digest it, and move on. In your world, and I've seen it working with you all at Trimble too, and everybody has this problem, and like you said earlier, we can solve a lot of problems. So let's just dump all the solutions on our customers versus finding that singular narrative. Let's find one problem for this conversation, this sales presentation, this landing page that we can solve for, and then we can actually bolt on a couple of other features there on how they all solve that. Have you found any other way to find that singular narrative better than using the ABT, or how had you done it in the past before the ABT?
I kind of go back to the Maya Angelou part, which is a story is like life with the boring parts left out. And so from our audience's perspective, what would they think is boring? And strike that out. And then at the same time, another concept to add to that is in a novel, if an author has written about a gun on a mantelpiece on page 3, somebody better be using that gun by chapter 3. Otherwise, why in the world did you bring up the point about the gun? So that's a way to insist and ensure that everything that's being said is purposefully leading to the next, to the next, to the next, and it all holds together. Because extraneous details and information, we're all bombarded with so much stuff right now. It's really, really hard to make sense of it. And so if it's actually really refreshing if the only things that are on a page or in a presentation are actually supporting your point and not distracting or adding to it and taking it down a tangent, actually helps the communication and people to understand what you're saying and engage with what you're saying.
Where do you think storytelling is going in your line of work? Because it's still relatively new. People are just really beginning to adopt it now, and it seems like there's so much room for growth.
I think it's becoming more and more of a standard sort of capability, especially in marketing. So you see that in job postings, communication skills, and a lot of them will actually start only saying not only writing or verbal, but also storytelling. And I've actually started to add that into the job postings I have up in my team. I'm like, okay, I want writers on my team, and not only writers, but I want people who can tell a story on my team, because at the end of the day, we're all storytellers. Even if it isn't in marketing, you're in sales, clearly storytelling, because it's all about persuasion. But I would, engineers, it's like you want people to do something differently than what they've done before. What are you going to do? You're going to tell them a story to get them to change. And those who are the best storytellers will win. The best story sells more. That's kind of my little tagline, my commercial insight, to complement those two together, because otherwise people are just like, overload. Oh, I'm already overload. Get to the point.
Get to the point, make that small story really have a business impact for you. And when you can make your business point in that story, it sure beats your opinion and your assertion, doesn't it? Because they can see it in action. Yep. They can feel it. I mean, it's even like you were saying with when you're selling storytelling internally, and you've got the folks that are going to say, this is woo-woo, Kari. This is a woo-woo park. I don't want to do this stuff. Just let me sell. Until you show it to them in action and let it actually make the point for you and demonstrate it. I imagine you probably maybe had some pushback from some of your writers when we were doing that LinkedIn work. They had all the right content. We just reordered it in the and, but, therefore. But until you sent me that ROI and said, look at the engagement rate. It went through the roof. Then your writers go, oh, this actually works.
Yeah,
we got to have proof in our life, don't we?
Right. Yeah, well, it goes back to the problem setup, right? Like, I didn't know I had a problem, and now, oh, wait, I guess I did, but I'm starting to solve it now.
And the challenge is if you lead with that problem versus leading with that agreement, that statement of agreement that says, we all agree this is what you want, right? Yes, that's exactly what I want. Then insert the problem. If you start with that problem, I've had this backfire on me too. They're like, well, wait, Park. No, that's not the problem, is we see it at all. And I'm like, okay, how do you see it?
Yep.
And from the outside looking in, you might be right, and they just don't see it. But if you start with that problem and there's not agreement of what the problem is, then you've got a divisive relationship immediately right off the top. And now you've got to really prove yourself. That's why I love that. You start with the end in mind, right?
Yeah. And nobody likes to have some stranger or some vendor come in and tell them that they're doing things incorrectly or wrong, or they could be better. They're like, who made you a CEO of my company? Thank you very much. And it just sets it all off, I think, on the wrong foot.
And where do you see it going from here? What are you so excited about with storytelling in your business?
I think that there's so much opportunity to be so much more focused with an audience. And so a good story not only engages an audience to embrace and come to you and want to know what's more and what's next, but it also sends out signals to those who the story is not for, right? And so it really helps not only us to focus on what we're offering, but it helps everybody else to say, oh, yeah, that's right. I'm not really interested in accounting software. I actually want design software. And it helps them navigate their world and go to the right place instead of, blogs that must be 5,000 words long just for SEO rankings. It's like, what?
So, final question here. I'm a new writer. I just have come to work for you at Trimble. What is the first piece or pieces of storytelling advice do you give them?
Well, basically, I've had them watch your training sessions you did with my team and read your book. It was kind of the first bit of it. And then, it's a muscle that has to be exercised. And so what I am hopefully leading by example in all the I do my best in all the emails or even the chats that I send around. I try to myself to structure them as ABTs, especially in the beginning when I would communicate with my team. I would go, and da-da-da-da. But there's a problem, therefore, da-da-da. And so everybody could see what I was doing and made it very clear and very simple. So that's really kind of where I would start them with the storytelling is, learn the structure because kind of going back to my point is, storytelling isn't just a bunch of, stuff with people sitting around the campfire trying to figure out how to tell a story when they can't because it's actually purposefully designed as a story. And most people know almost all of the information. And so it's just the order of the information in which it needs to be presented.
And like you said, cut out the boring parts.
Yep.
Cut out the boring parts. Kari, where can people learn more about you and see the work you've been doing, either in past life at HP or now at Trimble?
The best place would be really LinkedIn. I have my LinkedIn profile. People can find me there. And, perhaps some of the magical pieces of content that have made their way into the world. The most recent one that I had a hand in is a global data report that we commissioned them to ghostwrite essentially on our behalf about connected construction and the technologies. And we're actually having a webinar with 2 of our leaders and 2 of their leaders on October 4th. Because of the way that we positioned it and because of the way we wrote the copy to promote the webinar, we're north of 1,000 registrations for that particular webinar. And for Trimble and for the construction industry, that's like 4x of what they've ever experienced before.
Wow, congratulations. Nice work.
Yeah, thanks.
That's really where you demonstrate the power of story, isn't it? This is when you get to introduce the data that the drama created.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Well, Kari, thank you so much for taking the time. I know how swamped you are over there at Trimble, and so I really appreciate you coming on the show today.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your engagement as well.
And thank you all for listening to this edition of the Business of Story. Look, if you're in the tech world, if you are dealing with sales and marketing, trying to find that alignment or trying to get more power out of your communication, use storytelling. It really, really works. Kari gave you some really great ideas here using that format, that NICQL, N-I-C-Q-L. Need, importance, consequence, quantify, and then the look and listen. I love that. And of course, start with the ABT. We have found that seems to be where all persuasive and influential storytelling begins, is to get that simple little setup, problem resolution dynamic down. And if you do nothing more than that, you can use it in all your sales, marketing, messaging, everywhere. So check it out. If I can be of service to you, come on over to the Business of Story. And of course, I've got 3 online courses you can take at businessofstory.com/ABT. And until next Monday, when we'll have another story artist right here for you like Kari, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks so much for listening.